My landlord accused me of causing property damage and said she was evicting me. I told her, please put it in writing. 2 weeks later, an official eviction notice showed up in my mailbox. My landlord claimed I owed $8,000 for extensive property damage to the apartment. The list included a cracked bathroom tile, water-stained walls, and broken cabinet hinges. None of it was my fault. The tile had been cracked when I moved in. The stains came from a leak in the unit above mine. The cabinet hinges broke because they were old and cheap. But she had photos dated from last week and an official document with a lawyer's letterhead. I had 30 days to pay or she'd take me to court. The next day, I took photos of everything. I documented every inch of the apartment on my phone, trying to prove the damage existed before I moved in. But when I looked back at my old move-in photos from 3 years ago, I realized they were blurry and dim. I had taken them quickly on my old phone while rushing to pick up my daughter from school. Before I could even respond, my landlord filed the court case. The notice came in the mail, my court date set for the same week as my daughter's parent-teacher conference and my double shift at the hospital where I work as a nursing assistant. I asked to reschedule, but the clerk said no changes were allowed. That smart move of asking for things in writing was starting to feel like a huge mistake. I tried calling my landlord to settle outside of court, but she never answered. I left voicemails explaining that I was a single mom, that my husband had died 2 years ago, that I couldn't afford $8,000. She never called back. Instead, she started sending her son to inspect the apartment. He'd show up unannounced with a clipboard, taking pictures and notes. My daughter would hide in her room every time. "Mommy, why is that man always here?" she'd ask. I never had a good answer. I finally hired a lawyer for $500, the money I'd been saving for my daughter's school supplies. He looked at my photos and her documents and said, "Her paperwork looks more professional. The judge might believe her dates over yours." He told me to find any emails or texts proving the damage existed earlier. I searched everywhere. Nothing. My landlord never texted. She always called or left handwritten notes on my door. Every piece of evidence I found made my case look weaker, while hers looked airtight. Still, I printed everything I could, 3 years of on-time rent payments, my lease showing she was responsible for repairs. Even a letter from my upstairs neighbor confirming his unit had leaked into mine last year. Then, the day before court, her lawyer sent me a thick envelope full of documents, each one more official than anything I had. Professional photographs with timestamps. Receipts for repairs I'd never seen. A signed statement from a contractor I'd never met, claiming he'd inspected my unit and found tenant-caused damage. I walked into court feeling like I was already drowning. That written request had given her all the time she needed to bury me. The judge, an older woman with reading glasses, listened to the landlord's lawyer first. He presented his neat, organized case with glossy photos and professional reports. Then it was my turn. I showed my blurry move-in photos. I explained the leak. I showed my payment history and my neighbor's letter. I even brought my daughter's school records to prove we'd lived there the entire time. The judge examined my documents carefully. For a brief moment, I thought she believed me. But then she looked at the landlord's photos again, sighed, and said, "Ma'am, I understand you're going through a difficult time as a single mother, but I can't ignore the quality of documentation on the landlord's side." She held up the glossy photos. "These are time-stamped, taken by a licensed contractor, and clearly show significant damage. But Your Honor, that damage was already..." She cut me off. "I think you're making this bigger than it is because you're under stress and looking for someone to blame. The evidence clearly favors the landlord. You owe $8,000 plus $1,200 in court fees. You have 30 days to pay." I felt my chest cave in. Outside the courthouse, my upstairs neighbor was waiting. "I'm so sorry," he said. "The landlord's son came to my door last night. Offered me $2,000 to take back my letter." I froze, then pulled out my phone. "Say that again." "Everything." My hands trembled as I hit record. He explained how the landlord's son had shown up around 9 at night, envelope full of cash, asking him to forget about the leak and pretend he'd never written the letter. He said his wife was home, but stayed in the bedroom because the man made her nervous. When he finished, I thanked him 3 times before I stopped recording. That night, after putting my daughter to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, shaking. But not done fighting. Not yet. I opened my laptop and typed tenant rights organizations into the search bar. The first website listed 3 local groups that helped people fight unfair landlords. I emailed all 3, explaining everything, the fake damage claims, the court case I'd just lost, and attached the video of my neighbor's confession. I hit send on each one. It was almost midnight when I finally closed my laptop. I barely slept that night, checking my inbox every hour, hoping someone would respond. The next morning, during my break at the hospital, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. A woman introduced herself as Lena Vasquez from the Tenant Justice Coalition. She asked me to resend the recording so she could listen carefully. I stood in the break room while she played it twice, my neighbor's voice echoing faintly through her speaker. When she finally spoke, Lena said this was exactly the kind of landlord fraud case her organization specialized in. Cases like mine, she said, happened all the time, landlords using polished paperwork to exploit tenants who couldn't afford proper legal help. For the first time in weeks, I felt something loosen in my chest. Lena explained that the bribery attempt gave us grounds to file a motion to set aside the judgment, fraud upon the court, she called it. It wasn't guaranteed, but it gave me a real chance to reopen the case with proper representation. The recording proved the landlord had tried to buy a witness's silence, which meant everything in her case could be a lie. She spoke quickly but clearly, using simple language instead of legal jargon. We had to act fast, she said, before the landlord started garnishing my wages or placing liens on my belongings. When I asked how much it would cost, Lena said her organization worked for free for people who couldn't afford private lawyers. I met her that evening after my shift. She stayed late to match my hospital schedule, and the kindness nearly made me cry. Her office was small and cluttered with file boxes stacked against the walls. Lena looked younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled into a ponytail. But when she talked about tenant law, her voice carried the confidence of someone who'd fought this fight many times and won. She grabbed a yellow legal pad and started taking notes while I told her everything from the beginning. She asked detailed questions about dates, conversations, and every visit from the landlord's son. Then she spread all my evidence across her desk, my blurry move-in photos beside the landlord's polished ones. Opening the photo files on her computer, she showed me something called metadata. The timestamps on the landlord's photos said they were taken last week, but the metadata showed they were actually from 3 months ago. That's proof she lied about when the damage happened, Lena said. Then she looked at the contractor's signature on the inspection report, pulled out her phone, and searched his business online. Within seconds, she found his real signature on his company website. It didn't match the one on the landlord's documents. We spent 2 hours organizing everything into a formal legal filing. Lena explained each document in plain English, making sure I understood every line. She showed me how to write a declaration detailing every lie told in court. Then she drafted the motion to set aside the judgment and attached my neighbor's recording as evidence. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like a partner in the fight, not a victim. Lena printed everything, had me sign in 3 places, and promised to file it first thing in the morning. That night, I sat on my daughter's bed after tucking her in. I told her we were getting help from people who fought unfair landlords for a living. She looked up at me with her big brown eyes. "Will the scary man stop coming to our apartment?" she asked. I told her we were working on it, that a lawyer was helping us now. "Do we have to move away?" she whispered. "I'm doing everything I can so we can stay," I said. She hugged me tight, not wanting to leave her school or friends. I held her until she fell asleep, then went to my room and cried quietly into my pillow. 3 days later, I was washing dishes when someone pounded on my door. Through the peephole, I saw the landlord's son, clipboard in hand. My stomach dropped. I opened my phone's recording app and hovered my thumb over Lena's number before unlocking the door. Holding the phone where he could see it, I said calmly that all future contact needed to go through my attorney. He stared at the phone, his face turning red. He stepped closer to the doorway. "You can't tell me what to do in my mother's property," he snapped, pointing at me. My pulse raced, but I stayed calm. "All communication goes through my lawyer now," I repeated clearly, making sure her name was captured on the recording. He called me a troublemaker and said I'd regret making things difficult. I kept my phone steady, recording his threats and the way he leaned into my doorway, saying his mother owned the building and could make my life hell. I stayed silent, letting him talk himself into more trouble. When he left, I locked the door and replayed the recording. Every word came through perfectly. I texted the file to myself as backup, then sent it to Lena with a message explaining what happened. She called within minutes, saying this was exactly the kind of evidence we needed. "Landlords like this always slip up when they're angry," she said. The next morning, Lena was at the courthouse before it opened, filing our motion to set aside the judgment. She attached the recording of my neighbor's confession and detailed how my landlord used fake photos and forged documents. The $200 filing fee was covered by her organization since they knew I couldn't afford it. She handed me a copy of everything, explaining how she laid out the fraud in clear legal language. Holding those papers felt like holding hope. 2 days later, my landlord called, furious. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was full of threats, saying I had no right to record her son and that I'd be arrested for invasion of privacy. I sent it to Lena, who laughed and said it was more evidence of harassment. That afternoon, Lena called the contractor listed on the landlord's report, a man named Ahmad. On speaker, he said he'd never been to that building and someone must have forged his signature and stolen his credentials. He promised to send a statement confirming it. Lena hung up smiling. "That's the first crack in her case," she said. While we waited for the hearing date, I researched my landlord online and found 3 other buildings under her name, all with tenant reviews complaining about surprise damage charges and withheld deposits. I showed Lena the reviews, and she suggested reaching out to other tenants. During my lunch breaks, I started calling numbers from those posts. Most went nowhere until one woman named Courtney answered. When I explained my situation, she went quiet, then told me the same story, fake photos, forged reports, threats of a lawsuit, and a $6,000 repair bill for damage she didn't cause. Courtney told me she never fought her case because she couldn't afford a lawyer and was terrified of ending up homeless. She'd been paying the debt in installments for 2 years, working 2 jobs just to survive. Her voice shook as she spoke, the fear still fresh. When I asked if she'd talked to my lawyer, she immediately said yes, wishing someone had helped her back then. I connected her with Lena that same afternoon. Lena listened carefully, asking about dates, documents, and everything the landlord had said. When Courtney finished, Lena said she wasn't surprised cases like this were common because landlords counted on tenants being too poor or scared to fight. She asked Courtney to send whatever paperwork she still had. That weekend, Lena called me with news that made my hands shake. She'd cross-referenced contractor names across multiple properties owned by my landlord. The same fake contractor appeared on reports from 4 different buildings, always with forged signatures, but the same license number. This wasn't just about my apartment. It was an organized scam to defraud tenants. Lena started drafting a broader brief to prove deliberate fraud. A few days later, the court clerk called to schedule our hearing for 3 weeks out. Lena warned me the landlord would likely show up with a pricey lawyer, ready to attack my character and call me a liar. I asked if we could win. She said yes, but nothing was guaranteed. The next morning, I came home from my night shift and found a certified letter taped to my door, 10 days to vacate or be forcibly removed. My hands trembled as I read it. I called Lena right away. She told me to breathe and said she'd file an emergency motion to stop the eviction that day. My daughter helped me take new photos of the apartment before school, holding the flashlight while I documented the cracked tile and water stains again. Lena filed the motion by noon, and we got a hearing 2 days later. At the hearing, the landlord's lawyer argued I was just delaying the inevitable. But when Lena played the recording of my neighbor describing the bribe, the judge stopped checking her watch. Then Lena presented Ahmed's statement confirming his forged signature. The judge cut off the landlord's lawyer and ruled to pause the eviction until the fraud could be fully investigated. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. My daughter wouldn't be forced out of her home. That afternoon, Lena called again. A journalist named Dawson Carver had heard about our case. He'd been investigating predatory landlords for months and thought mine was part of something much bigger. Talking to a reporter felt risky. What if it made my landlord angrier or hurt the case? Lena assured me exposure usually helped because landlords like mine hated public attention. After a day of thinking, I agreed to meet Dawson, a local journalist investigating landlord fraud. Over coffee, I told him everything. He'd already found 6 other tenants from my landlord's properties who'd paid fake damage claims, mostly single parents or elderly people too scared to fight back. A week later, Dawson uncovered proof that my landlord had collected over $45,000 through fraudulent damage claims using a fake contractor name across multiple properties. Lena used his findings to strengthen our motion, arguing it was organized fraud, not a simple dispute. Soon, more tenants came forward wanting to join the case, and Lena said we might be looking at a class action. Then came a settlement offer. My landlord would drop all claims and pay my legal fees if I agreed to stay silent and stop helping others. It would fix everything instantly, but it felt wrong. I thought about Courtney, the other victims, and future tenants who might fall into the same trap. I told Lena I wanted to reject it and fight to the end. She warned it wouldn't be easy, but she was proud. Lena filed an expanded 40-page brief with all our evidence, fake signatures, Ahmed's affidavit, and victim statements. The next day, the landlord's lawyer called, clearly shocked we'd refused the deal. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep at all. I barely slept the night before the hearing. I kept rehearsing what I'd say, going over every document until dawn. My daughter found me at the kitchen table and made me a crayon card that said, "You're the best mom." I slipped it into my folder as a reminder of why I was fighting. The hearing lasted 3 hours. My landlord brought the same expensive attorney who'd offered the settlement. He tried to get our brief dismissed, calling it irrelevant. Lena calmly argued the pattern of fraud proved this wasn't an isolated case, and the judge agreed. The landlord's lawyer then tried to discredit our evidence, calling the recording edited and the forged signatures clerical errors. Lena dismantled every excuse, playing the full unedited recording, showing handwriting analysis, and presenting identical forged reports from other properties. Ahmad testified that his contractor license had been stolen and used on fake inspection reports. Courtney described paying $6,000 for fake damage in another building. My upstairs neighbor confirmed his leak caused the water damage and that the landlord's son had offered him money to retract his statement. When it was my turn, I told the judge about my spotless rent record, my husband's death, and working double shifts to support my daughter. I described the fear of losing our home and how I'd used her school money to hire a lawyer. The landlord's attorney tried to portray me as bitter and dishonest. Then Lena played the final recording, the landlord's son threatening me, saying I'd regret fighting his mother because she had money and lawyers. His voice filled the courtroom. For the first time, I saw the judge's expression change. As the recording played, the judge's expression hardened. She looked at my landlord with clear anger, then called a 15-minute recess to review the evidence. Out in the hallway, I could barely breathe. My hands shook, my stomach twisted, and time crawled painfully slow. Lena tried to reassure me, but I was too anxious to listen. Finally, the bailiff called us back in. The judge returned, calm but firm. She announced she was setting aside the original judgment because the evidence proved fraud, forged documents, bribery, and witness tampering. My landlord's lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him. She ordered my landlord to pay my $3,500 legal fees and referred the case to the district attorney for possible criminal prosecution. She dismissed the $8,000 judgment and all court fees. I had one. I sat frozen for a moment before bursting into tears, not from fear this time, but relief. Lena hugged me, telling me I'd been braver than most. My landlord passed by, glaring with hatred, but it didn't matter anymore. She couldn't touch me now. A week later, Dawson's article hit the newspaper, local landlord's fraud scheme exposed. It detailed how my landlord had stolen over $45,000 through fake damage claims, targeting single parents and elderly tenants. Reading it made everything feel real. 2 days later, Lena called. The district attorney had officially opened an investigation. After Dawson's article came out, 3 more tenants from my landlord's other buildings came forward with the same stories of fake contractor reports and staged photos. The DA's office launched a major housing fraud investigation and asked to interview me as a witness. The case had grown far beyond my $8,000. It was now about protecting others from the same abuse. But even after winning, I knew I couldn't keep living in that apartment. Every hallway reminded me of her son's threats and my daughter hiding in fear. I called Lena and told her I needed to move. She connected me with a nonprofit that helped fraud victims find safe housing, and 6 weeks later, my daughter and I moved into a brighter, safer apartment across town. There, with an honest landlord and peace for the first time in months, I finally felt free. My daughter smiled again, decorating her new room with drawings. I began volunteering with the Tenant Justice Coalition, helping others document evidence, fill out forms, and understand their rights.